Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going to be talking about the MDR. This weapon has a nice middle ground of flexibility, budget and low modding requirements, so stick around and let's get going. So today we're talking about the MDR and how it fits into our weapon choices relative to a few other guns, namely budget assault rifles in the 545 category where it's most directly comparable. At the end we'll be going through a really important comparison between common 556 and 545 ammos, so make sure you stay around for that because it's a real good one. But just before we get into the specifics, I'd like to thank NVIDIA as the sponsor of today's video for the release of NVIDIA Reflex in Escape from Tarkov, which is a feature that can reduce internal latency or lag within your PC by up to 38%. Do go and check out the link in the description with more information, and of course it will help me out as well if you do so, but ultimately Reflex is all about reducing the time that it takes for an action to process within your PC. For example, clicking your mouse to fire versus when you actually see this occur on your monitor. In a very similar way to the ergonomics comparisons that I've done in other videos comparing ADS speed with different attachments, this internal system latency is also measured in milliseconds and can make a big difference both in other competitive titles and also games like EFT where the time to kill is so incredibly low. Using the MDR as a specific example for comparison, if we take a stock MDR equipped with an Elcan scope with 80 ergonomics versus an equivalent suppressed MDR with 62 ergo, you can measure an ADS speed of 10 frames or 166 milliseconds versus 16 frames or 266 milliseconds, which is a difference of 100 milliseconds for 18 ergonomics. When using Reflex, you could receive a latency benefit of 19 milliseconds for a 60Hz monitor and up to 51 milliseconds for a 144Hz monitor, which in this instance would translate to 4 and 9 extra ergonomics respectively on your weapon. This ergo comparison is different for each gun, but this shows why Reflex is important. For a game where precise performance of weapons and loadouts matters so much, and we spend so long finessing them, you should also care about this on your system. Having a lower system latency ultimately makes the game more responsive for you, with reduced input lag on your mouse movements. From tracking targets, taking precise shots and reacting to split-second decisions, all of these situations benefit from having lower internal system latency. If you're a user of the GeForce GTX 900 series and higher, so that's the 9, the 10, the 20 and the 30 series GPUs, you can take advantage of this new feature by heading into the game's settings menu and turning it on, and your latency will be optimized. Give it a try and see what you think, but to me there appears to be very little downside in using it, and it's just that little bit of extra smoothness that you want to have when you're out in the raid. What works on my machine is having VSync off in the NVIDIA control panel and Reflex enabled in EFT, and that's it, which uncaps my frames completely. So with that said, delving into the MDR from a high level, there are two types available both in EFT, which is the 556 version and the 762 NATO version. The 556 is approximately 50 to 55,000 on the flea and can be found on Peacekeeper 3 for around 110,000 rubles equivalent, whereas the 762 version is around 90 to 100,000 on the flea and can be acquired at Peacekeeper 4 for approximately 170,000 rubles. Right off the bat from this, we can see that the MDR is not really an early game weapon unless you pick it up from someone else, or using the original 556 version that you got if you went USEC at the beginning of the game, because you need to be level 20 to get it from the flea market because it's so incredibly expensive from the traders. With no barters for either weapon too, you're simply best off just using the flea to buy them when you can. The main focus of this video is going to be the 556 version, but we will touch on the 762 as well later, given that it has similar features and principles despite being in a totally different caliber which makes it perform quite differently. The 556 version of the MDR is a great all-rounder that requires limited modding and is pretty decent straight off the shelf. It tells you something that in Pestoli's Punisher tournament, once the Vector and the MP7 were removed, the MDR became next in the list, and that was even buying it from Peacekeeper. I've spent a lot of time with low mod requirement weapons this wipe, such as the RFB and the P90, and the MDR has some similarities here in that there is no detachable stock with its bullpup configuration. Now, this is a double-edged sword in that it has fairly decent recoil to begin with, and I know that I always talk about this, but the way that stockless weapons work mean that you can't get the recoil that low in general because attachments affect them less than weapons with separate stocks. I go through all of this in this video here, so watch that afterwards if you want more information on why that is the case. On the flip side though, modding the MDR is really straightforward, requiring just a foregrip and a muzzle device. It starts off with a stock ergonomics of 75 and a recoil of 71, and it takes all of the regular 556 compensators and suppressor combos. With 1211, there was a new suppressor added which is now the best in-slot muzzle for recoil for the 556 caliber, which is the Silencer Coat Seika ASR, which fits onto the ASR 556 compensator, with a combined reduction of minus 23% recoil. On weapons like the M4, this combo is a total beast, but as mentioned already, I don't think it's really worth it on the MDR given the minimal recoil difference that actually gets applied to the MDR overall. Also to bear in mind, in August 2021 all suppressors got a further ergo penalty nerf, so as of posting this one gives you minus 24 ergo as a combo, which really is quite a lot. Adding this to the MDR gets it to 53 ergo and 58 recoil. Alternatively, you can pick one of the other combos that isn't as good on recoil, but is generally both cheaper and better for ergonomics. My personal favourite is the SF3P and either the RC2 for best recoil, which is minus 18 recoil and minus 18 ergonomics for 59 ergo and 63 recoil overall, or alternatively the Monster, which is a little lower and minus 17 ergonomics and minus 17 recoil, but tends to be a bit cheaper on the flea market for a total of 60 ergo and 64 recoil. And to be honest, this one is probably more worth it given the stats are so very similar. There is one more suppressor which fits the RC2, which is the Mini Monster, which is very bad for recoil relatively, but much better for ergonomics, which gets the MDR to 69 ergo and 65 recoil if you really want to retain your speedy ADS and still go suppressed. Given the best in slot here without a foregrip is 58 recoil, but 16 ergonomics worse, for once the Mini Monster is actually a potential choice on the MDR where it just isn't for other weapons that scale better with recoil reduction buffs. The MDR handguard is M-LOK fittings all around, which means that you need the 4.1-inch rail to mount anything other than the M-LOK AFGs, and the 2-inch rails are required for adding tactical devices such as lasers and flashlights. You can buy these rails cheaply from Mechanic 2, so it's not really an issue, but if you find yourself in a bit of a spot on a new account, or pre-level 20 with one, he now has 2 barters at level 1, which are very useful for getting these for measuring tapes and USB plugs, which don't have a ton of uses elsewhere. The best in slot foregrip for recoil is the RK2, but as we said previously, it's not worth it on the MDR. I also literally cannot find them listed on the fleet ever, so I haven't been able to identify one yet to use in these build videos. Roll on level 38 with Skier. Anyway, this means that we can just use something for the ergonomics, as the amount of recoil points that are removed by foregrips is around 4 at most. If you have Peacekeeper 3, you can get the native M-LOK foregrips from him, which are good value at minus 2 recoil and plus 7 ergo, but they are super expensive on the flea, so don't buy them from there. Absolute best ergonomics is the Fortis Shift, but for 1% recoil less, which we don't care about losing here, you can get the Strike Industries Cobra from Mechanic 3 for 11,000 rubles, which is a good deal. This gives 1% recoil and plus 9 ergo, with the ergo the same as the Shift. If you don't have this and you don't want to pay 15 to 20,000 on the flea for the Cobra, I wouldn't personally, but you do want an ergo boost, do not discount the level 1 Peacekeeper grip that gives ergonomics only at plus 7. It's super cheap, it has the same ergo as the M-LOK grip, which is a fairly decent one as well in my opinion, and only costs $32, which is about 4,000 rubles. What a bargain. Switching over to the 7.62 MDR just for a moment, the weapon functions in much the same way as the 5.56 version, but with a higher starting recoil. It's nice to have full auto whilst using 7.62 NATO, as it's the only other weapon alongside the SA-58 that can go full auto in this calibre. However, the biggest issue here is that currently you can only get 20 round magazines for it, which as a solo player I find a little rough when fighting squads on full auto, especially given the recoil is not really that low, bottoming out at around 80. This is not so much of a problem on semi, but then if I'm using semi, I'd rather just use a different weapon like the SR25 or the M1A that can get to really nice levels of recoil in the 50s region with sensible ergo values. That said, it does cost a decent amount to mod these guns out properly, so you can think of the 308 MDR as a sort of budget SA-58 with high ergonomics that doesn't need much modding similarly to its 5.56 brother. In that respect, for just under 100,000 for the weapon and only needing a muzzle device and a cheap foregrip, it's pretty good. Now, if we want to compare the 5.56 MDR to other weapons in the budget category to see how it fares and ultimately decide whether it's worth running, we basically have to look at the 5.45 AKs as the closest comparison, as they fill virtually the same role and are an equal contender when it comes to choosing an intermediate weapon. The AKs are also a good comparison, as the flexibility of the platform means they can be bought cheaply and modded anywhere from a dirty quest runner to a shiny PMC slayer. Handily, the fire rate of both the MDR and the 5.45 AKs is also the same, which makes it easy to compare on recoil for this one as they both have 650 RPM. Modding a 74M down to the starting recoil of the MDR costs as little as 15,000 rubles. Here I threw together a quick build that uses the Zenit comp, the butt pad and the Bastion. Combined with the fact that you can get one from the flea at 10 to 15,000 rubles now, does this make it better and a more economical weapon to use? Well, I started by running a few tests of the same recoil level of 70 just to kind of see if it made any difference, and I actually definitely felt that the MDR's pattern was more stable after the initial burst stabilization that occurs in Tarkov's recoil system, and when measuring the ADS speed, this AK was much more like the suppressed MDR in terms of performance at around 283 milliseconds, so there is this to consider. Also, this isn't quite a fair comparison on the MDR either. The cheap 74Ms on the flea are all scav grade and have around 50% durability. If you want to go and get one that has above 80% durability, this is much more likely to set you back over 30,000 on the flea. Even if you don't care about the jam chance, the ranged inaccuracy should be enough to make you consider if this is something you're going to be wanting to spend money on and modding and sticking a scope on. Another decent alternative is the RPK, which comes out at around 40 to 45,000 rubles on the flea, with MDR stats right out of the gate too at 63 ergonomics and 71 recoil, with greater than 80% durability. However, there is one big difference for me that swings this entire comparison heavily in favour of the MDR, and that is the ammo, of course, M856A1 versus 545BT. Remember Tarkov Rules 101, the ammo maketh the weapon and not the other way around. When you start out using 556, all you have available to you is M855, which is fine at the beginning, but when coming up against level 4 armour, the next step to M856A1 is a material improvement. The beauty of this round is that it can be bought from Peacekeeper 2, but you have to have completed his quest, the Cult Part 1 first. Once you do, however, you can get this for $3.01 per round, and yes, the screen lies and rounds it up to 4, but this is about 375 rubles per shot. In the patches prior to 12.10, BT was an amazing budget round due to its availability, generally going for around 300 rubles or even less sometimes, but with 12.11, the chance of BT spawning has been decreased quite dramatically, the effect of which can be seen in the prices on the flea market. BT used to price well under Prapol's trader price of 641 rubles, but now it goes for the same or even slightly higher. Looking at the two rounds in comparison then, M856A1 is roughly half the price of BT, which is worth around 8,000 rubles per magazine that you take in on risk, i.e. in your rig and your gun. For 3 magazines, this extra 24,000 cost really starts to make the MDR look like good value. This is in fact even more valuable than it looks because of the impossibility of ensuring ammo, which means it is guaranteed to get lost if you're solo and die, and a buddy would have to specifically drag it out of the raid for you to get it back in squads. But there's more. These two rounds have the same penetration of 37, which gives them both a 55% chance to pen a full durability level 4 armour on the first hit. However, M856A1 does have considerably more damage, hitting for 51 rather than 44. This is actually a big deal when we remember that even when penetrating armour, the round receives some damage mitigation just from passing through that scales with the armour level. For BT to 2-tap a thorax, it deals 44 times 2 damage for 88 total, which means that it only needs a tiny bit of damage mitigation, around 4%, to prevent a clean 2-shot kill. 56A1 on the other hand, in 2 rounds deals 102 damage instead, and requires over 16% of damage mitigation not to 2-tap a thorax at 85 HP. And if you didn't think that was enough, one of the other awesome features of the 556 caliber is the extremely high fragmentation chance, at 33% for 56A1 versus 16% for BT. If 2 PMCs are full on spraying at each other, taking damage through arms and legs rather than clean killing shots, the average damage of BT given the frag chance is 47.5 versus 59.5 for M856A1, which is 25% higher. There are so many viable guns in Tarkov, but if you're looking for a workhorse that just works in pretty much any situation, the MDR might be for you. Minimal modding, cheap and decent ammo, high ergonomics for close range ADSing, and good accuracy for long range engagements, it's hard to go wrong with a weapon like this in Escape from Tarkov. Before we go, a final reminder to check out the link in the description to find out more about the NVIDIA RTX cards and their new Reflex technology, and if you give it a look, it'll help me out too in making sure I can continue to bring high quality sponsorships that are relevant for you to the channel. If you learned something or enjoyed today's video and want to support the channel, please as always consider sending a like and a comment, as it helps with visibility for those who haven't found me yet on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter and Twitch to check out when I'm live, which is currently 2 times a week, once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the real-time recording of the Scav Talk podcast, which you can check out the link to in the description below, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time in the afternoon. And with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.